The Lord's my shepherd, he gives me all. He takes me where the cool rains fall. He is the place free from earthly strife. He gives me help. He gives me life. Sometimes it's dark and there's danger near, but you are there. I have no fear. You give me food so my foes can see that I am yours, that you love me. Throughout my life, you point the way. Your helping grace is there each day. Throughout all time, may we sing our love, our thanks and praise to God above.
Good afternoon and welcome to the show. I'm Deacon John Blehosh. The topic for today's show is going to be hospice, and my guest is going to be Kathy Hugler. Welcome, Kathy.
Thank you so much,
And
Deacon John.
thank you for the song. I appreciate that.
Yeah, I thought that would
very
be a nice way
rendition
to
of
open.
Psalm 23.
It is.
So last time we met, we decided to do another show, and you suggested a topic of hospice, which I thought was be a great topic to talk about. So let's start off with basically what is hospice?
Well, hospice is, I mentioned that word because I kind of wanted to talk about end-of-life care. And hospice is a word that many people hear in relationship to end-of-life care. And I'd like to maybe start with the broader topic of end-of-life care and then move to the more specific topic of hospice. But basically, some people get really, really nervous when you start talking about dying.
Right.
And I don't know about your cultural background, but I can tell you that for a lot of Irish people, and I come from an Irish clan,
Right.
There's a lot of superstition, and there's a lot of, we don't talk about it because if we talk about it, it comes to us, and so we're not going to talk about it. And I can remember when I was a kid, if you mentioned someone was sick in the house and you mentioned calling the priest, they'd blanch.
Right.
They'd get totally white.
Yeah, right.
Because if you call the priest, it means you're dying.
That's exactly.
That's it.
Exactly.
And of course, today, we've come a long way from that. They thought that the sacrament of the sick, which at that time was called the sacrament of the dying, or extreme unction, as you remember,
That's right.
was only given when a person was in the moment of death.
Correct.
And now, of course, that sacrament, in the Catholic tradition, that sacrament is given to anyone who's seriously ill and wants the grace of the sacrament to get stronger and healthier and get through the illness.
Right.
And if it is meant for them to die, of course, it's a very good preparation for them.
Even for me, before I had my operations, I asked for that because I just wanted the extra graces and the benefits from it.
Exactly.
And of course, like I said, at one time, people, well, you're not dying. No, but you can still receive graces and blessings from the Lord because of the situation you're going to be in, from an operation or from an illness or whatever. So it's there.
So it's a whole different ball game now compared to what it was when we were
Younger.
younger. And the church teaching has changed.
Exactly.
Too. So, but people still find it very, very unsettling to talk about dying, and yet, guess what? We're all going to die.
Oh, eventually, yeah.
So it's something to talk about and to get comfortable with talking about ahead of time, because there are many, many things today that we know in healthcare that we can make a person's movement toward their moment of death much more comfortable and much more peaceful.
Right.
We have, and so, but the other thing that I wanted to kind of focus on was that there are teachings in the church to guide us in our thinking about our final moments, whether it's thinking about my final moments or thinking about a loved one's final moments.
Correct.
And talking about what are the parameters, what are the measures, what are the methods that we can use, what are we allowed to do as Catholics, ethically, morally, and in terms of our religious heritage.
Right.
What are we encouraged? So
Right.
end-of-life care is something that we want to just get a little bit more comfortable with talking about before we're actually in the process.
Right. Now, are there certain? I'm going to ask this because I know too, but are there certain moral obligations that puts a situation where we want to sustain life, or?
Well, of course, our faith tells us that God is the giver of life and God is the taker.
Correct.
That we have no role in the giving and taking of life.
Right.
It is a gift from God. And so certainly we preserve and defend life, especially in its most weakened or needy form. So we want to especially defend life in the unborn,
Right.
as we teach in our church.
Correct.
And then we want to preserve life in the newborn as the child progresses. We want to preserve life in people of all ages.
Right.
And then as we come to our death, if people are very sick, or if they're weak, if they are mentally incapacitated, it becomes our task
Correct.
to defend and protect their life. So
Right.
whenever we talk about end-of-life care, we always start from the basis of understanding that we are here to defend and protect life because it is a gift from God and a very sacred gift.
Yeah.
We also want to recognize our role, and it is taught in the church, of charity as regards care for people's lives. And so when we're caring for somebody who's terminally ill, we also want to preserve their dignity. We want them not to suffer unduly.
Yeah.
And so we want to take measures and steps that preserve the dignity of their life and the comfort to the degree that we can alleviate their suffering. There is no part of the teaching of the church that says we should let a person suffer when we can comfortably and easily, with what we can do now, preserve them from that suffering.
Right.
And that brings us a little closer to the question of what hospice is and what it's about.
I got another question though. As you were saying, first of all, the thing is, I know that the teachings when I was in the seminary, they talked about ordinary and extraordinary means of having a person. Now, if the people don't understand the financial burden that could be created from a situation, they should be explained as, correct?
Right. Absolutely. There are a lot of considerations when a person is terminally ill, or when we know that they are coming to the end of their life. Their illness or their condition is such that we know that there is no remedy now.
Yeah.
So medical science can do things to a certain point, but there comes a point where we know it's inevitable they are going to die. At that juncture, we have questions in our mind about what we can do medically and what are we obliged to do ethically.
Correct.
The church teaches, again, from the basis of the fact that we understand it is God's gift and it is God's to end a person's life and not ours, that we want to preserve life, but we don't want to use extreme measures to preserve life if those measures are going to cause suffering, undue suffering.
That's right.
Are going to prolong life but with no quality of life.
Correct.
And if they are going to be burdensome, you mentioned economically.
Right.
There is another consideration for not being burdensome,
Right.
in the sense that sometimes a person physically, by, for example, trying to continue to feed them,
Yeah.
their body's shutting down. Their bodies cannot process the food.
Right.
By trying to continue to feed them through something like a feeding tube,
Yeah.
we may be able to extend the time that their heart beats, but we will cause them great suffering, physical suffering.
Right.
The same with hydration. There comes a point where if the body organs are already closing down,
Yeah.
because this person is transitioning to the other life. And
Right.
again, we have to remember that for us, it's a transition to a new life.
That's right.
It's not the end.
That's right.
It is a transition to a new life.
Right.
But there are cases where hydration can be removed because giving more water to the body when the body can't utilize it
Correct.
really causes the person pain
Correct.
and suffering. So there are many guidelines that are very simple and
Yeah.
very clear, and I would encourage anyone who questions if they're in this situation where they have a loved one who's dying,
Yeah.
or they themselves are looking at the prospect of dying, and they want to be well informed
Right.
what to tell people they want or don't want. There's a particularly good website, and I don't know if we can do it in the credits at some point to put this up, but it's called CatholicEndofLife.org. CatholicEndofLife.org. And apart from many other resources that you can find, this particular website is done by the Archdiocese of New York,
Right.
and it's extremely helpful in giving some of the guidelines as to help people to get through
Right.
this
Right.
part.
Yeah. I know that we mentioned that, and the other thing is that in regards to making the person as comfortable as possible. Now I know there are medications out there now that have been brought forth that can make a person feel more relaxed and not as much pain as was in the past. And I know, but some of these medications can also shorten the length of a person's life.
Right.
But again, we're looking at it. What do you make? Do you make the person suffer, or try to make the person be as comfortable as possible, even though we know that it's inevitable that the person is going to pass anyway?
Right. The measuring of how some of those medications shorten life, we know that they tend to cause some changes in the respirations of the person.
Right.
And yes, you can interpret that or measure that and say we're shortening their lives. But the church teaching on it again says, provided it's a pain medication that is actually relieving pain
Right.
and suffering, alleviating the suffering of a person,
Right.
and it's given with the intent to alleviate pain, not with the intent to shorten life,
Right.
then it is permissible to go ahead and give it. Understanding, and this is the thing, John, I find this when I work in health care. I'm privileged very often to be present when a person is making the transition. The person is dying.
Right.
And I'm privileged sometimes to have opportunities to talk to them ahead of time,
Right.
to talk with the family. One of the things I often remind them, and I remind my coworkers in healthcare, is that ultimately God is still making the call.
That's right.
I'm doing everything that I can do for the well-being of this person, for their
Right.
peace, for their comfort, and for their well-being. Ultimately, if I do 100 things right now to help this person, and this is the moment that they're meant to go home to God,
Right.
they will go home to God no matter what I do.
That's right.
If I don't do those 100 things, and they're meant to go home to God in this moment, guess what? They're going home today. There's a certain trust that we have in God's acting in our lives that guides our mentality when we see this. It's not that therefore I can do whatever I feel like in healthcare.
Right.
Obviously, I still make very, very careful moral, ethical decisions
Right.
about healthcare. And as a healthcare worker, I'm regimented by many rubrics, many rules that dictate what I can and cannot do
Correct,
for a patient.
correct, yeah,
However, and ultimately the patient and the patient's family have a great deal of decision making in that.
Yeah.
But ultimately, I always say, let's remember that God is here.
That's right.
Let's remember that God is active and that God is going to take this person
Right.
to God's self at
Yeah.
the exact moment.
That
We
God
are
wants.
helping. We are making this a process that is holy and peaceful
Right.
for the person.
Yeah, and God's always present there, regardless of what you think,
Absolutely.
whatever. So,
God always has
yeah, and
the
when,
last
when
word.
God feels the moment or the time is right, then it is what it is,
Exactly.
and that's the thing. Now, sometimes when you talk about hospice and you talk about end of life, people think of cancer, but there are other illnesses besides cancer that can affect a person's life to put them into a hospice position, correct?
Of course.
Yeah.
Let me start by taking the word hospice and making a little bit of a shift. What I find when I mention the word hospice to many people, even in my own family, is that their reaction is, no, I'm not ready for that yet.
Yeah.
No, I'm not dying.
Yeah.
I'll do hospice a few days before I'm going to die. I'm not doing hospice now.
Yeah.
I'm not ready.
Yeah. Yeah.
Let's change the word hospice for a minute,
Okay.
which people hear hospice and they say, you're dying.
Yeah. Right.
Hospice equals you're dying.
Yeah.
That's not wholly fair to the notion of hospice or to what it can be for a person. So
Yeah.
I'd like to change it to hospital comes to you. Hospice means hospital comes to you, meaning there are many things, there are many services that hospice can render, that can offer, that are typically done in a hospital but not typically done at home. Hospice, the concept of hospice to some degree is simply to allow you to be home in familiar surroundings with your own family
Right.
at a time when that would be the greatest way to make the transition.
Exactly. Yeah.
Being in a hospital has many pros and it has many cons.
Correct.
And an individual, most of us, I think, would choose to be in our own bed at home
Yeah.
rather than in a hospital
Exactly.
bed any time in our lives.
Right.
Certainly at this critical time, if I can be home, but the only way for me to be safely in my home is to have the hospital come to my home,
Exactly.
which is hospice,
Right.
then let's do it that way.
Right.
So hospice provides services, certainly health services primarily,
Mm-hmm.
but it also provides other kind of support services for a patient, for their families. And some hospice groups, some hospice companies provide, I think most of them do provide chaplaincy, meaning it also provides some spiritual comfort and some spiritual guidance
Mm-hmm.
for not only the patient,
Right.
but for the families.
Right.
I was very blessed to be connected with a chaplain down in New York with a hospice company, and she worked as a chaplain in hospice, and it was just a wonderful grace for her to be able to come into a home,
Right.
to talk with the patient about dying, how did they feel about it, were they afraid, and help them get past that fear so that they could move toward death
Right.
without as much fear. I mean, obviously, we don't know what it's like. We don't know where we're going. We don't know how it's going to be, and therefore it creates apprehension and fear. Although I'll tell you, I've met many patients who were absolutely ready to die, and they would say to me, I'm ready.
Mm-hmm.
If it's today, it's today.
Right. Yeah.
I'm okay with
They-
that.
they
I'm
know.
at peace.
They know
They've made
that-
peace.
That's the thing.
So hospice, the hospital coming to you, provides services in the home that allow you to stay home
Yeah.
rather than being in a
I
hospital.
think that's a beautiful it's a beautiful definition that way, because then to me it kind of wipes out the stigma from of the word itself.
Exactly.
How are we doing, Alex? Good? Time? Okay. Yeah, and I think that's great that way, because I have witnessed a situation where people have passed at their own home, and it's almost like you're providing that sensitivity to the individual, that this is what they really want to do, just the way they want to go in their own environment, what their own family around them and things of that nature. And it does make the transition from one life to the other life more acceptable.
Right.
And it's almost like, because I know I've spent some days in a hospital, which good care and everything, but it's not like being at home with your family in your own surroundings.
Right.
Because these people who are there to help you are still strangers to you in a situation where they're not immediate family or whatever. Even though they're loving you in the sense that this is their job to do and doing the best they can for you, it's not the same thing.
Exactly.
And I can see that.
And
but again,
you mentioned at the beginning, I'm sorry for interrupting you.
No.
You mentioned at the beginning people's association of hospice with cancer,
Right.
and that makes it's certainly a natural connection.
Right.
I've known a number of patients. My own good mother was a hospice patient, but she had no cancer. She had chronic respiratory disease,
Right.
lung disease.
Yeah.
She did not have cancer, and we call them COPDers. I don't know how common a term that is for a lot of people, but
Right,
people with chronic lung disease that
Correct.
is not necessarily cancer,
Mm-hmm.
who are, and they come to the end of their lives.
Right.
It's a difficult end of their lives, but we can do a lot to keep them comfortable,
Mhm.
to keep them, and to give them that dignity at the end.
Right.
Because one of the things that happens is we having strange people around in the hospital. Now, our local hospitals here in Vermont and also in New Hampshire, very often, especially the smaller hospitals, you get to know the folks. You get to know your nurses. You get to know the staff.
Right.
And
Yeah.
you feel like you're somewhat home.
Yeah, exactly.
And cared for by people who care about you.
Mm-hmm.
That's one of the great blessings of a smaller hospital, a country hospital, if you
Yeah,
will,
exactly.
a local hospital. But hospice, and by the way, and I'm sure you know this too, hospice is also provided in hospitals.
Mm-hmm.
So they change a little bit the way they care for the patient. The hospice company comes in and does a little bit different treatment for the patient who's on hospice
Right.
in the hospital. And then there are actual residences, and they're obviously short-term residences for people who are in hospice because their home setting is not adequate. They can't be cared for adequately. They need something. So there's a kind of an in-between place. It's not a hospital.
Yeah.
It's a hospice residence, and it's certainly not their home. So
Right.
there are lots of options. The other word I want to just bring to the conversation is the word palliative.
Palliative, okay.
Palliative care is a fancy word, again, for end-of-life care when we are providing we're not trying to cure anything anymore because it's beyond that point and we can't
Right,
cure it.
Right.
But palliative care is the care that we offer a person who is beyond remedy. They can't really be cured.
Mm-hmm.
So we are about making them comfortable and giving them as much quality of life
Right.
as we can possibly give them. Now, palliative care and hospice are kind of intertwined because when you're on hospice, you are receiving palliative care, if I can make
Correct.
the term
That-
used in that sense.
That's right.
But palliative care is something that happens in hospitals as well, and it happens in other settings. So it's care that's given without so much a mind to cure, but rather a mind to preserve the dignity of the person, provide as much comfort and as much quality of life.
Yeah.
There are people, that's the other thing, John, that I hear very often. A person says, no, hospice, no. When I'm really dying, that's when I'll do. If you were able to break the stigma and have a person go on hospice a year before they die,
Yeah.
and in fact, and this happened with my mom, this has happened with other patients that I know that have been on hospice.
Right.
We don't know when the person's going to die, but
That's
we
right.
know they're in that.
And that
There's
stage, yeah.
there's no pulling them back now.
That-
They're going
that's
to die.
right. Yeah.
But it could be a year.
That's
It
right.
could be 6 months.
Yeah.
Hospice generally will take a patient when medically we know they are going to last a few more months or 6 months or a year.
That's right.
But why get the services only in the last 3 days? And that's what people do. They get into
Yeah,
hospice for
right.
3 days. Then they
Yeah.
say, oh, I wish I'd had these services earlier.
Yeah.
So when a doctor tells a patient they're terminal, there's not anything else aggressively that can be
Right.
done for them, and even recommend that they consider hospice, the advantages, I've known people on hospice for a year. I've known people on hospice for 6 months, 8 months.
Yeah.
And the people who've been on hospice for a year, then they're reevaluated. They can be on hospice for longer, because we don't know. And some people's lifetime is going to extend out.
Yeah.
But why say, oh no, I'm going to wait till I'm really sick?
But that brings a question on my mind that says,
Mhm.
well, why talk about end-of-life care? It's a good reason to talk about end-of-life care
Exactly.
because people understand more about it, to clear it up, to have it more understandable, and to say, well, if this is what it's all about, maybe this is something I really should be looking forward to when I get to that situation in my life that I need something like this to help me out. And but like you say, because of the old myths, and to go back and of course, I know I grew up in a Polish house, so there were, all these things about worrying about, that when the thunder, like to bless a candle because it's going to protect you. But if the thunder hit the house, the candle fell over and it burned, it would be no good. But you had to do that, light the candle,
Right.
But I mean, and I appreciate that. I appreciate all the stuff I grew up with. But those were the things, the stigmas that were labeled to everything at that point in time.
Mhm.
And once you clear that up and you see that this isn't as bad as it's made out to be, then there's something more good to it.
Right.
And the thing is, like, we're talking about, life that God puts it there from birth to natural death, and this is it. And only God has control over it.
Right.
But we can help the person out in, living their life to the fullest, whether it be from the beginning or at the very end.
Exactly.
Yeah.
Yeah.
So.
I think too, and I think I tend to think of European cultures as being particularly hesitant to talk about death. I said my own culture, Irish, we tend to be hesitant about it. But the more we talk about it, and I would give you anecdotally this example, having said that we were not inclined as a culture to talk about it much, we came to the point where we did talk about death. And my mother, who I'd stayed with her for a year, the last year of her life, I had the great privilege and the great blessing of spending that year with her.
Yeah.
And we talked about what she wanted. And this is some of the things, we all, and I shouldn't say we all,
is that
but
what you call
most
a
people,
bucket list? What
she didn't. No, she didn't have a bucket list. But we're all pretty careful about making sure our will is in order.
Well, yeah, that's
Don't
a good thing. That's a good thing.
will?
That's a good thing.
Well, why not a will that talks about what I would like in my final days? For example, my mom was so funny. We had a conversation one day, and she said, "I don't want to be laid out in," and she named this Irish funeral home.
Yeah, I remember you mentioned that. Go ahead. I like the story.
Now, my mother, we were Irish, and
Yeah.
so she didn't want to be laid out in the Irish funeral home. And I said, "Well, Mom, why not?" And she said, "Because when I go there to my friends' wakes, I can't even recognize them. I don't like the way they prepare them. I don't want to be laid out in that Irish place. I want to be laid out in the Italian funeral home over on," and she told me the location.
Yeah.
So I went in, but she said to me, "I don't know if they bury Irish people from there. We should go find out." So I went. Now, who would think of these things? This is an part of Brooklyn, New York that's very ethnic.
Yeah.
And so I went to the funeral parlor and the funeral home, and I said to the gentleman, "Do you have a good sense of humor?" And he said, yes, he did. I said, "My mom wants to know if you bury Irish people from this Italian funeral home." And he laughed and he said, "Of course we do. We even give them the Celtic or the Celtic cross.
Yeah.
We do everything as they would like it."
Yeah.
She was so happy with herself. And we talked about what she wanted to be dressed in, and we talked about other little things.
Yeah.
It sounds odd to have that kind of conversation, but it relieved all of us, her children, the burden of saying, what would she have wanted?
That's right.
Now we knew.
Now you knew.
People need to talk about whether they'd like cremation or not, because now the church allows cremation.
They do.
And more people are finding that a valuable option. The thing that has happened, and it's church teaching, is we honor the remains of a person when they die. We dress the body, we bury the body with great care, we pray over the body, recognizing that, as St. Paul says, this body is a temple of the Holy Spirit.
Exactly.
And so it is sacred.
It is.
And so in the Catholic tradition, the body is treated as a sacred vessel.
Mm-hmm.
When we bury a person in a casket and so on, we do it to honor them, but we also recognize that we are returning, as it says in the scriptures, ashes to ashes, dust to dust. We're returning to the earth as we were once part of the earth.
That's right.
People now are moving toward cremation, and again, I think it's a cultural thing. There's all kinds of, I want part of my ashes thrown here, and I want part of my ashes thrown there, and I want them sprinkled over the ocean. Well, the Catholic Church has suggested that we think that through a little bit.
Right. I agree there.
What does it mean that I can scatter someone's ashes to the four winds when, if I were burying their body, I would no more think of scattering their limbs than the man on the moon?
That's right.
I reverence their body in that form. I should also reverence their body in the form of ashes.
Right.
So the Catholic Church does recommend that we think about that a little bit. And how do we honor this person? And one of the ways we do is by burying their remains, which happen to be ashes.
That's right.
With the same honor, with the same care that we would if they were in a casket, their body were in a casket. It's just a little thing that we have to kind of think about now, because cremation is new to our Catholic heritage.
It is. I got to tell you one thing. I did a burial in St. Peter's Cemetery way back for two sisters. One was buried in a casket, and one was cremated,
Yeah.
side by side. But
Nice.
I said, this is what they want. That's good. But I mean, it's amazing the way it was done that way. But anyway,
Interesting.
I appreciate you coming on again
Yes, it was
and
wonderful
doing the
being
show.
here.
And I think it was a great topic, and I think that we really did cover
A lot of interesting things.
stuff. Yeah, we did a whole big area.
And again, I just want to mention that website in case people are interested.
Okay, I
It's
think
called,
that the Ella can put
and
it on.
maybe they can put it on
Okay.
CatholicEndofLife.org.
Yeah. Okay.
Very, very
Yeah,
fine.
we'll make sure we get that so you can put it in
information.
on it somewhere in the show, whatever.
Beautiful.
Like that. Well, thanks again.
Thank you.
Want to do another show with you sometime again or something
That'd
else?
be lovely.
Appreciate it. Okay, great. And thanks for watching, everybody. Appreciate it. I hope you enjoyed it. And for all my my followers or for the people watching the show, may Almighty God bless you. The Father, the Son, and the Holy Spirit.
Amen.
Amen.